This week on The Destination Angler.
The Blackfoot Valley is probably one of the least molested valleys left in Montana. When you drive that route from Missoula to Helena and up to Rogers Pass, it is surprising because there are places where you can go, get up a little bit, and look out and see things the way Meriwether Lewis saw them pretty much when he went through there in 1806, the first white man to do it. So it ain't all bad that the rich guys come out here.
That was John Maclean on the Blackfoot River. Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome to episode 100 of The Destination Angler, brought to you by Adams Built Fishing, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear built to last at an affordable price, and by Anglers Coffee, perfecting the coffee experience for the fly fishing community and anglers everywhere with small batch coffee delivered to your doorstep. It's darn near perfect. By Got Fishing, crafting world-class fly fishing adventures specially designed for your level of experience and budget. And by Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app, helping you find new trout waters so you spend less time on the road and more time doing what you love, trout fishing. Coming up on The Destination Angler, we have our second episode featuring John Maclean, who delves deeper into the fascinating story behind the story of the book, the movie, and his family on the Blackfoot River. After that, we head east to the Deerfield River in northwestern Massachusetts. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode of The Destination Angler on the world-famous Provo River in Utah with renowned artist and fly fishing guide Walter Foster. You won't want to miss these shows. And to commemorate episode 100, head on over to the Destination Angler website and pick yourself up a super cool 100th episode Destination Angler t-shirt. I designed it myself. You know, I continue to be blown away with the positive feedback from listeners. Here's one from Kayak Fly Fisher. I've been a longtime listener to the Destination Angler podcast. This is one of the best outdoor-related podcasts on any platform, hands down. And here's one from Colton from Utah who says, a great podcast, worth the listen every single time. Wow, thank you so much for all the encouraging words. They mean a lot. And if you like the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button and tell a buddy. Today, our destination is the pristine waters of the Blackfoot River in Montana, Part 1, with special guest none other than the acclaimed author and journalist John Maclean. John's not just any writer. He's the son of Norman Maclean, the literary genius behind the iconic book A River Runs Through It. The Blackfoot River is a place of rugged beauty and renowned trout fishing. It's a slice of paradise that has captivated the hearts of Montanans for generations, even before Hollywood took notice. But is its popularity a blessing or a curse? Well, we'll let John share his insights on that shortly. From his summers in Montana at a century-old family cabin to his illustrious career as a Washington correspondent for the Chicago Tribune, John covered historic events like the moon landing, Watergate, and the opening of China. Today, he's a dedicated fly fisherman and conservationist who regales us with his own tales from the storied river, the iconic book, and the beloved film that captured the imagination of anglers the world over, propelling the fly fishing industry to unprecedented heights. So let's hear from John. Well, John, it's great to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So, today we're definitely going to talk about the movie. We're going to talk about your books and your experiences in Montana and other places. But really, I'd love to start with the river, the Blackfoot River. Obviously, it's a special place for you and your family. But what does it mean to you personally, this river that's so famous?
Well, the Blackfoot River has made a lot of things memorable and possible. I think without the Blackfoot River, you wouldn't have the movie and the book, A River Runs Through It. We wouldn't be drawn back there the way we have been in my family for decades and decades. So it is a lodestone. It's an anchor. It's a place. One of the things that people have picked up on with home waters is that it creates a sense of place. That's very important, and a lot goes into that. It isn't just the river, it's also the Blackfoot Valley, which is relatively unspoiled. It's the cabin at Seeley Lake and all that kind of stuff. But the
Yeah.
river is at the center of it, and it keeps running.
Right.
Yes, I mean, I talk about that at the end of the book, that you can catch a big fish and have an exciting adventure, and then you stop and you look at the river and it's running. The reel keeps going forward. It doesn't stop and fix everything and then it's over. You can leave. Don't bother coming back. It isn't like that. It's, we're here. We're still functioning. You can come back and do this again.
Right. I love the fact that we do have these beautiful rivers in our country that are still running, that we can swoop in on occasion and go fish.
Yes. And there are organizations today and people who are trying to make them better.
Right, right. And then what do you suppose the allure of the Blackfoot River is to the broader fishing community?
Well, it has a good side and a bad side. I think people often go there thinking that they are going to buy their way into the legend of the Blackfoot and the Macleans and the movie and Robert Redford and all that. And that's the wrong attitude. I've talked to some other people about this. The Blackfoot today is overused. In the 60s and 70s, the number of visitors to Montana was about 1 to 1.5 million per year. And today it's 10 times that. It's 12 to 15 million people. I think every one of them comes to the Blackfoot River. And what are you looking for? If you come with a good attitude that you're approaching the legendary river, it fishes well, there's a proper way to approach it, but you're not going to be fishing it the way I did when I was a kid, and the way I can still occasionally sneak in and do it on the lonely. It's got too much traffic. There are too many boats. There are too many people. I was taking a boat trip down there last fall with some donors for American Rivers. And we got started, and there was a long, nice hole with a good foam line, and there was a little hatch of blue wing olives, and we matched them about a number 18. You don't have to get down to 20, 22 on the Blackfoot, and catching fish. And they said, "Okay, we got to go," the guide said. I said, "Well, why do we have to go?
Right.
We're doing just fine where we are." He said, "Another boat's coming. We got to stay ahead of the other boats."
Oh,
and I looked
boy.
back, and there must have been 4 or 5 boats coming after us. And it turns into this kind of roller derby where you know where the hot spots are if you're a guide, and you want to put your people on those, but you can't let them sit there and fish for an hour or two. You got to keep moving. Otherwise, you will be overrun. They'll get ahead of you,
Kidding.
and they'll spoil the water right ahead of you. This is not what we used to do. In the olden days, if you saw anybody else fishing during the day, it kind of spoiled it, and it happened, but it didn't happen that often. And there weren't the boats. That's a post-World War II development, where some of the guys came back with these rubber dinghies. And the first ones were really awful. They weighed a ton, and they leaked, and they were World War II surplus. And pretty soon they started making them in higher quality, and what you have today is very high quality.
Right.
And that's how people do it, And you can look on that river sometimes and just see nothing but an armada.
Right. So how should we adjust our attitude and our behaviors when we come to, because there's a lot of rivers out west that are crowded now like
It's
that.
happening all over the West. It's not just the Blackfoot, but it has happened to the Blackfoot because of the book and the movie, and now book plural. And what you can do is come with a good attitude, that you realize that this is what it's going to be. Get yourself a good guide. I think that's really the first step. If you know the area and you know yourself and you know how to fish bank fish, that's one thing. But most people who come in there for a 2-week vacation or whatever, they're not that far along. So get a good guide, and there's some very good ones. There are 3 good shops in Missoula. There's a very good shop in Ovando, the Blackfoot Anglers, and there are ones to avoid.
Okay.
Paws Up is one to avoid.
Okay.
They
Pause.
have bad guides, but they do one thing very well, and this is one way to do it. They take people down the Blackfoot in the boats who don't want to fish. They just want the scenery. They want the experience. And that's fine. No problem. And Paws Up does a very good job of that. They have lots of trucks that, and they often take a boat down in the morning and then recycle it and run it down again in the afternoon. This is overuse, but that's what they do. If you're going for the scenery, they're a good outfit to go with. Don't fish with them.
Right. So how do I determine a good guide? I mean, really, you're calling a fly shop. Let's say you live in Chicago and you want to fish the Blackfoot. You call out there, you talk to 3 fly shops. They all sound pretty good. How the heck do you pick a good guide?
If you look at the online comments on them,
Okay.
which are often unregulated, and if people had a really bad time, they will say so. You also look to see who sponsors them. Orvis is pretty reliable. I mean, they have high standards on what their guides, do. And I don't have kind of a tie to Orvis. I just say this because, in fact, they do have standards, and they do vet their guides, and they do a good job. Other than that, you're taking a chance. But if you get a mainline fly shop that's been around a long time and they have good reviews, and you tell them, look, I want a good guide. I'm
Right.
serious about this. I want to catch some fish, but I'm really there because I want to experience the Blackfoot River the way it should be. And tell them that. And they should respond to that.
Yeah. I think if you call way ahead of time, like if you're calling 2 weeks ahead of time, you're probably not going to get the best guide. You're going to get the kid who doesn't have a trip because he's new, maybe.
Point taken.
Yeah. So I read about the Muchmore Hole. I can't remember if it's in your book or your dad's book, but anyway, what's the story with? I couldn't find a whole lot about it.
Oh, thank God! The Muchmore Hole is the one place on the Blackfoot River that can be positively identified as a scene in a river runs through it.
Oh, okay.
There are other river scenes where very knowledgeable people have gone out and tried to find out exactly where this happened. And you can't nail it down. Those people happen to include my father. He and his longtime fishing companion, George Kuennebergs, went out one time and trying to find the place near the Belmont Creek where the last fishing trip among my dad, his brother, and his father occurs. And they couldn't nail it down. So it has to be somewhere near here. It has to be somewhere near Belmont Creek. But Dad said, I can't remember exactly where it was. So some things are better left in the mists of mythology. Muchmore Hole, not so. It's a beautiful hole. It's got all kinds of interesting water in it. And it has become a magnet for the guides and for fishermen. They come down in their boats, and very often they sit there for far too long on this hole, sometimes for a couple of hours. That is not sportsmanlike. The last time I was there last fall, I went down in a boat, and the Muchmore Hole was fishing. It was hot. And I looked up and said, my God, we've been here for 45 minutes. It's time for us to get out of here.
Right.
And there were 2 boats, and I said, we've got to leave. This has gone on too long. We shouldn't have been here this long. And I just caught a 20-inch cutthroat.
Nice. So
there has to be some sense of personal restraint. But the Muchmore Hole is the reason I wrote Home Waters. Well, it's a long story, but it's worth telling because this kind of thing happens. I had a friend in Chicago who was a businessman, an entrepreneur, and he got a big loan from George Soros, the famous financier, with a partner, buy a phosphate mine in Canada. And they bought it. They worked very, very hard to turn this thing around and turn it into a good business. They go to work with a bag lunch and, nothing fancy and so on. The company went public and they worked along. He was a big fan of A River Runs Through It. And he and I became friends. And he and his wife went out to Montana and were driving around looking at places. And they saw this ranch that happened to include waterfront on the Muchmore Hole. And it was up for sale for about $3 million, which was, way beyond. When you're taking a bag lunch, you don't think about buying a $3 million ranch. So they went back to Chicago and worked. And the company that had come out at $16 a share was bought out at $60 a share. And suddenly he bought the ranch.
Suddenly he had $3
So
million.
he gets the ranch, builds a nice place there, and continues to acquire land with Blackfoot River frontage to the point now that he's got about 8 miles of frontage. And he turns his holdings into an environmental custodianship tied to his trust fund. And so it can't be screwed up.
How about that?
And then he's got a friend across the river at the Muchmore. He does the same thing, and other guys do it elsewhere in the valley. And they're mostly incomers who have a bad reputation, right? Well, this is a case where the incomers created these easements and locked up the land. There is public use of the Blackfoot River. You can't keep people off of it.
Right.
So it's not as though they're stinky people.
Right.
But the Blackfoot Valley is probably one of the least molested valleys left in Montana. When you drive that route from Missoula to Helena and up to Rogers Pass, it is surprising because there are places where you can go, get up a little bit, and look out and see things the way Meriwether Lewis saw them, pretty much.
Yeah, no kidding.
When he went through there in 1806, the first white man to do it.
Yeah, right.
So it ain't all bad that the rich guys come out here. Anyway, the Muchmore Hole is there.
Which scene in the movie is tied to the Muchmore Hole?
Well, the movie was not shot on the Blackfoot.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
No, it's not. I have to go back and watch it again to be 100% sure, but I don't think anything is ever identified as being that hole in the movie.
I gotcha. Are you an avid angler in search of top-notch fly fishing gear that's easy on the wallet? Well, look no further than Adams Built Fishing Gear. Adams Built is the ultimate choice for anglers who prioritize quality, affordability, and style. Established in 2014, Adams Built has been the trusted companion for thousands of anglers, creating unforgettable moments on the water. Seasoned pros and beginners alike will love their lineup of lightweight and durable waders and wading boots, high-quality nets and fly rod starter kits, and meticulously designed fly boxes and outerwear. When I first heard about Adams Built, I have to admit I was a bit skeptical. Having run through many pairs of waders over the years, I wondered about their guarantee. So get this, folks, all Adams Built branded products are guaranteed to last, and Adams Built waders carry a lifetime repair or replace guarantee. You only pay shipping. Hard to beat that. So why not make Adams Built Fishing Gear your go-to choice? Check them out at a dealer near you or at adamsbuiltfishing.com. That's Adam Built Fishing, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear. Hey anglers, you've heard me talking about Angler's Coffee for quite some time now, and I have a question for you. Have you tasted it yet? Well, if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. It's darn good coffee, isn't it? Hey, if you're like me, tasting's believing, and believe me, this coffee tastes great. My wife and I are hooked on it. Angler's Coffee offers an impressive spectrum of flavor profiles, so there's something for everyone. You know, when you're spending a day on the water, you need a great cup of coffee to carry you through, like the Coachman's Blend. Named after the famous Royal Coachman, you'll love the design of the bag as much as the coffee. This blend of medium and dark roasted coffee from Central and South America produces a flavorful and smooth cup with notes of chocolate and baking spices and a smooth finish. Order some today and save 10% with a custom subscription like I did. You pick the coffee blends you want, and they're delivered right to your doorstep. And if you're not 100% satisfied, they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. No kidding. A percentage of each sale goes to some great nonprofit organizations in the fly fishing community. So put a smile on your face, just like I did, and give it a cast. That's Angler's Coffee. Tasting's believing. The movie was shot on the Gallatin primarily, is that correct?
It was shot on the Gallatin. One of the scenes with the boat going over the falls was shot in Wyoming. They never came up to the Blackfoot except to do a scouting there. And their excuse for not doing it on the Blackfoot was that the hills have been nibbled by logging, and that would be apparent. Let's
Okay.
remember that The River Runs Through It, the movie, won the Oscar for cinematography. It's a beautiful movie.
Right.
But what I also heard was that, basically things were not set up for a movie company, so that you would have to drive out from Missoula 55, 60, 75 miles every day and back with everybody. You'd have to have catering come out and back every day, and that they figured it would cost them 6 figures extra per day to do this. So that may have factored in. I'm not privy
I'll
to their
bet.
private negotiations.
I'll
I
bet
will
it
tell
did.
you that if my father had been alive, he wouldn't have allowed that to happen,
Oh,
because he
really?
would have insisted that it be on the Blackfoot. But he didn't. He wasn't there to do that. And my sister and I, who had the rights to it, did not insist.
And your father actually never saw the movie because he passed away before it was released, correct?
That's correct. He passed away before Young Men on Fire came out.
And how do you think, we're jumping way ahead, but we might as well go there. How do you think your father, how would he feel about the movie?
He would have had critical things to say, and he would have loved it.
A little bit of both.
Oh, yeah, very much so. Let's start with it not being on the Blackfoot. That wouldn't have happened. He negotiated to a point where he had veto power.
Okay.
And he would have exercised it. He would not have been shy about exercising that. So the movie may never have been made. Please take note that it was not made during his lifetime.
Didn't Robert Redford flew out and visited him in Chicago multiple times to convince him to even allow him to do this?
That's correct. And there was a script which was my dad didn't like for very good reason. It began with a scene on Seeley Lake where Paul is at the end of a wharf casting, and he catches a big rainbow trout and brings him in and holds him in his hands, and crack, he snaps the neck of the rainbow trout. A violent scene, and my father just went through the roof on that. He was written by a jerk who had connections to the movie. He's dead now and unmourned by me, and certainly would have been by my dad, but it was just bad. And my father's reaction was so negative to that I think Redford got the idea that you're not going to have an easy time making the movie with this guy. I have no proof of this, but I think he just waited him out.
Oh, no kidding. Well, who cracks the neck of a fish with their bare hands anyway? I mean, most of it's catch and release, but even if you decide to keep one, I don't know. Is that
Well, there was no catch and
fish?
release back in 1930s.
Yeah, I noticed that. I noticed that. One of my questions was,
or the 50s, or the 60s.
what in the heck did you guys do with all those fish? I mean, if you're catching your limit almost every time you go out there, back in the 19-teens and 20s, where did you put all these fish?
We ate them.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, nobody's throwing fish away. We froze them. George Kuhnebergs would put them in his freezer. You had milk cartons, and you take the heads off the fish,
Yeah.
and put them in the milk cartons and fill it with water, and then freeze them, and they're good. And some of this was subsistence. When George Kuhnebergs, who was our great friend there and fishing partner, was a railroad engineer, and he was not a wealthy guy, and it meant a lot to have that kind of protein available.
It's super interesting. I want to get into the movie some more, but let's go back to the Blackfoot for just a minute. A couple of things you said. You talked about, the rafts that came in after World War II. When did you start seeing people showing up in waders? Because nobody's wearing waders in the movie, I noticed.
Right. Well, we had waders, but remember that, in the 60s, they were very primitive. They were very heavy, kind of rubber waders, and you had hip waders.
Yeah.
The chest waders didn't come in, and I don't think until the 70s. I mean, give or take. I'm not an expert on this. But we certainly didn't see them around. And the materials that are used, Gore-Tex and the lighter stuff that make it possible to put on chest waders and still walk without falling over dead from dehydration,
right,
didn't come in until later. So we waded wet. And in the early part of the season, that could be really interesting.
Yeah, I'll bet.
It could be really cold.
Oh my gosh, it's hardcore, man. John, can you kind of break the river down for us? Like if If I'm coming out to the Blackfoot, what am I likely to see? Like, where does it start? What's the river like up high? And as you kind of get closer to Missoula?
All right, the Blackfoot River joins the Clark Fork at Bonner, Montana, which is 6 or 7 miles out of Missoula. And by then it's had all its tributaries poured in there, and it's a pretty good-sized river. From that section on up for about 15 to 20 miles is the lower Blackfoot. And it is paralleled, as it is for almost its entire length, by Route 200. You get snatches of it along the way, and sometimes long stretches, especially in the lower Blackfoot, where the canyon is very narrow, where you can see the river. That is heavily used, that lower Blackfoot, and it's productive. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly good water. Then you get to near Potomac, Montana, which is a big valley with a small town in it. It's agricultural land. And at that point, Route 200 goes through Potomac, and the river goes off to the north, and you leave the river. There is a road that parallels the river that used to be, until this past year, a nasty dirt road, which was good because it kept a lot of people out of there. And they've paved part of that now.
Oh, man.
So you can drive in there, and that has been reserved, thanks to an enlightened timber company, as public land. It was given as public land, and the BLM runs that thing. And that is another whole section, and runs from what we call Whitaker Bridge, which is a bridge that goes across after about 8 or 9 miles of the parallel road. And you can put in at Whitaker Bridge and take out at the point at which the river departs from 200. And that's one nice run.
Ooh.
And then you get into the upper Blackfoot. So that's a section which runs from Whitaker Bridge down for about 10 miles. And that's a nice section. It's very accessible, and there are camping sites along the way. Then you get into the upper Blackfoot, and you go through 9 Mile Prairie, and you hit the Blackfoot River again. That's with Route 200. So you pick up Route 200, and then you can continue on to the east. And there are places along the way where there are put-ins and takeouts. And it's easy to get a map, good thing to have, which shows all these, a fishing map of the Blackfoot River. You can get them online. All the shops have them. And take a look at it before you go and discuss this with your guide. Which section do you want to do? The most scenic section is the Box Canyon. You see about one cabin the whole way. And if you want to know what it looked like back in the day, that's it.
Oh, really? Okay.
And a lot of people go there for that reason, and it's heavily used, and it is overused. And it includes the Muchmore Hole at the end. The takeout is at Scotty Brown's Bridge, which is after you come out of the canyon. But it's a beautiful run, not to be knocked. And it's now too much of a destination. There have been times when the put-in on the North Fork of the Blackfoot for that stretch has had 100 rigs parked there.
Oh, boy.
That doesn't include the people who were there and dumped off their boat and then left and went to a pickup spot.
Sure.
So it is grossly overused. But if you discuss this with a competent guide, they can take you along and keep you moving along. Don't expect to sit on a hole for a long time. That's the other thing about how to approach a legacy river. Don't count fish.
Please.
Don't say, I've got to catch 10 or 15 or 30 fish. I've got to have a 30-fish day. That's not it. What are you looking for? Are you looking for something of reverence for water? Are you looking for the magic of the stillness of water? Or are you looking to check off something on your bucket list? You earn respect with the first two, and you lose it with the last one. And there are a lot of people who go in there, bang, bang, bang. On my first cast, I'm going to catch the movie If a River Runs Through It. And my second, I'm going to catch Norman Maclean. And, it ain't going to happen, partner.
Yeah.
You've got to get in there with a different attitude. And if you do that, you can't stop people from going there. So if you do that, that's the way to handle this.
It's the attitude. That's a great message, John. It needs to be out there. With so much information out there, it can get downright confusing and even overwhelming to find the right fishing adventure. Sorting through all the options and fees can be quite the headache. Well, not anymore. I'm super excited to introduce Got Fishing. Got Fishing is a boutique booking agency for world-class fishing adventures around the world. They ensure that you are on the exact fishing trip that meets your skill level, budget, and desired experience. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, Got Fishing's personalized service will help you decide which adventure is the best fit for you, your group, or even your business. Worry about fees? Worry no more. With Got Fishing, you won't pay anything extra because their services are entirely free for you. You see, Got Fishing exclusively partners with highly reputable outfitters who gladly compensate them for their services, ensuring a win-win situation. Explore the range of fishing adventures and learn more about the services Got Fishing provides at gotfishing.com. That's www.gotfishing.com. And check them out on Instagram, too. Huge news, folks. The #1 fishing app, and I'm talking Trout Routes here, has been updated to include the entire lower 48. That's 50,000 streams mapped and classified into 4 categories and 350,000 hand-curated public access points marked and ready for you to explore. You know, there's nothing more exciting than finding that new trout stream or access point. I'm a huge fan of Trout Routes because they make it so easy. Say goodbye to stumbling around country roads looking for your next spot, because Trout Routes provides every detail you need for each stream, including public and private bridges, stream flows, trail access, where to park, camping opportunities, boat ramps, and more. No service, no problem. You can save maps for offline use. With Trout Routes, I've found dozens of new streams and access points I never would have known about. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. You know, I fished the Blackfoot twice. I fished it in the early 2000s with some buddies, and it wasn't, I don't think we saw any other boats that day. And we had a great day. We did really well. And I just fell in love with the river then. And then we fished it just a few years ago, and it was definitely more crowded, and it didn't fish as well. But how do you think the river is fishing today? With all this traffic, how's it affected the fishing?
Well, the river was in bad shape at the time the movie came out. It had degraded through a whole variety of causes. But the movie brought in an awful lot of money for the Blackfoot, and it was handled very intelligently, both by government people and by private people. And it was channeled through 2 organizations, the Blackfoot Challenge and the Blackfoot Chapter of Trout Unlimited. And they worked, and they were staffed and peopled by locals. And they worked very closely with local people, so people knew each other. And so you would go on to a ranch to work on a tributary that had been turned into a ditch. And you wanted to meander it and turn it into a good spawning stream. And you had to talk to a rancher. And, some of these guys are kind of tough-minded. They don't want you on their property. But if you're a neighbor, if you know them, you can approach it like that. And they did. And there was engagement by the affected people. So they put up fences to keep the cattle off it, but still allow them access to the water. That's very tricky because the water level rises and falls, and you have to kind of work at it. And it doesn't always work, but it keeps the Blackfoot from being an open sewer for cattle.
Right.
And buffalo. There's a buffalo herd on one of the ranches.
Oh, okay.
And I would hear stories about this. We went on to this guy's ranch, and we got permission to go ahead, but he was very skeptical. And he would come out and watch us doing things. So we're working on a meander, and we need some timbers to put in there to block the river and turn it. And we don't have them. And he says, been watching you. I got some of those in my barn. And he'd go get them and become part of the process. That may be a little apocryphal, but that tells you the spirit that worked.
Yeah.
Blackfoot fishes today better than it did when I was a kid.
Really?
It was hammered. People lived out of it. A lot of people took a lot of protein out of that place. And it was degraded for several years after the Mike Horse Dam, which had a lot of mine tailings in it. That's up at the headwaters. After that broke, there was cadmium in the river, and for years we didn't fish it.
Yeah,
because
poisonous.
the fish were poisoned. That is now down. It's still there, but it's sunk into the bottom, and the fish are okay. And besides, you throw back nearly everything now. They have what I think is very foolish policy of totally favoring the cutthroat and saying, well, you can take the rainbow of a certain size and the browns, yeah, take all of those, and we hate brook trout. The native fish thing has gotten a little out of hand. Yes, cutthroat are the native fish there, and whitefish, and in some places grayling. But the rainbow are about as much of a Blackfoot fish as you're going to find. Blackfoot rainbow is the signature of that. They fight better than the cutthroat.
Yep.
The brown trout live generally in water where there's not that much competition with others. They can take the warmer water. And totally favoring, because they're native, seems to me warped. The rainbow and the brown have been there for over a century. When do you get to be a native? Is this some anti-immigration policy?
Yeah, right.
When you think of it in those terms, it gets a little different. It's a nativist policy. I'm glad that they have brought the cutthroat back. And the way to do that is to improve the spawning grounds up in the mountains. And they've worked hard on that. We have the Blackfoot Clearwater Stewardship Act, which has been held up by Senator Daines and continues to be held up by Senator Daines, very foolishly and greedily. He wants to have stuff that has been put into Wilderness Watch, taken out of that and returned to multiple use. And that's his price for doing that, and just stuck. That kind of an effort and other efforts to get the upper tribs in really good shape for cutthroat spawning have been very helpful and effective.
Yeah. It sounds like you've got a lot of partners out there who are pulling in the same direction. A few that aren't, but sounds like most of them are.
Well, the Blackfoot Stewardship Act, Blackfoot Clearwater Stewardship Act, has over 75% approval by Montanans in poll after poll after poll, and the approval rate has only grown. Why is you, as a Montana senator, Senator Daines, continuing to oppose this?
Yeah, come on.
When you have said in a public hearing, which I listened to, that you were going to meet with Senator Tester, who's a sponsor of it, and come to a compromise, and you haven't done it. You've hauled out your old demand that the stuff that is held up in study has to be taken out of that. I don't see why there isn't a compromise there. I mean, some of that probably should be taken out. He's probably right about some of it.
Yeah.
But not all of it.
Not all of it.
Yeah, they're kind of separate issues. Give him some of what he wants. I'd be for that.
Yeah, but let's move forward. That's always the problem, isn't it? You covered Washington for a few years.
Well, this thing has been around forever.
Oh, really?
And it has got overwhelming support of the people in Montana. They're not all like that. Sometimes you get a special conservative conserving legislation, and it has, 41% approval. It's got over 75.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, let's shift gears just for a minute. Tell me about the hatches on the Blackfoot. I mean, is it known as a bug factory? What's it like?
It can be a bug factory. That's a problem everywhere because of climate change. There have been summers I've been there where the hatches get burned out by September 1. But the ones I like are in the fall. There's usually a BWO hatch. You can fish that river with a number 14 or 16 parachute atoms virtually any time of the season.
Yeah.
And do reasonably well. You can fish it with a grasshopper imitation, and it is wise to go to one of the fly shops and ask about that and buy the ones that are current, because those grasshoppers will be green one year and small and fat and yellow the next.
Really?
They follow, it's weird.
Yeah,
there is
weird.
a dominant strain that works. And if you're off that, substantially off of it, you're not going to have a high success ratio. So visit the fly shops and take their advice. The hatch I like best is the October caddis. It's great, big, bumbling flies. You fish them dry. You can also fish them wet, but it's really the most fun to fish them dry. Big strikes, big fish, big fat flies, easy to see. So my three favorite flies there are a grasshopper imitation, dry or wet, depending on the season, A quill, a simple yellow quill, is good anytime. The October caddis, and a parachute Adams. But what everybody fishes with now is two and sometimes three flies. So the hopper and a dropper, caddis and a dropper. You can drop a really teeny little nymph off of a number 14 parachute Adams if you dope them up and dry them out every third cast, and they work.
Yeah.
80% of what fish take is subsurface.
Right.
Let's face that. And nymphing is extremely effective fishing.
What style of fishing do you like? Are you in all the new tightline stuff, or what do you like to do?
I like dry flies. I like 9 foot, 5 weight, R.L. Winston, boron 3X with about a 9 foot leader. You don't have to have an enormously long leader.
Okay.
8.5, 9 feet is just fine. 4X is plenty light enough if you want to go to 5.
Okay.
It is. 5 is fine. And a small dry fly, and you're good to go. It's not like the East, where it's highly selective. The Blackfoot has been fished so hard in recent years that it has become much more selective. But compared to the East, it's still way, way behind. The fish are.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, if you see a BWO hatch and it looks like it's about a number 22, you can get there with an 18.
Huh.
Yeah, you don't have to go all the way down. You may be a fisherman who likes to go all the way down, and that's fine.
Yeah, go for it. But you don't need to.
You want to join the 2020 club, number 20 fly on a 20-inch rainbow. That's great.
Are you in that club?
I am.
How about that?
I've done it. I don't do it every year.
Yeah.
I don't fish enough to do it every year, but I've done it. Yes.
All right. So George Cronenberg, do you still have patterns that George tied in your fly box, or somewhere in your house?
I have a lot of them.
No kidding.
And they work. They work everywhere. I used to use them in the East until I got out of wet flies pretty much into dry flies. They work in Alaska. They work in New Zealand. They may not be, the hottest fly there, but the yellow quill on a 6 or an 8 hook, big thing, is yummy for the fish. They just like it. And when I'm having a very slow day on the Blackfoot and I can't get anything to move on the surface, I will go to that and get some action.
Do you actually fish flies that he tied still, or do you just? Yeah. Oh, you do. His flies.
I do.
Oh, no kidding.
I have some that I've saved that are beautifully tied, and then he did 2 kinds. He would send friends and me a handmade box of flies. He'd make these boxes. They're beautiful little things out of cardboard. My friend who owns the ranch on the Muchmore got one of those once, and he wrote back to George. He said, "Oh, gosh, George, thanks you so much for this. I've put these things in a shadow box, and they're beautiful." And George wrote back and he said, No. Those are for fishing. So I'm sending you another set. You will fish with these."
Okay. Yeah, I'm not tying flies to just look at here, I would love to see, can you snap a couple pictures of those? I bet people would love to see pictures of these original flies that you guys are so in love with out there, your family. That'd be awesome.
Have lots of pictures of them. I have pictures of them in the boxes, too. The boxes are wonderful. Yeah, the first one I ever got, that's kind of interesting, and I tore it up and threw it away. And the second one I got, I said, why did I ever do that? These things are craft. This is folk craft.
Yeah, the box it came in.
Yeah, I mean, he was this great big guy with 6'3", fabulous athlete, and great big hands. And, he was a railroad engineer. Yeah. And he would make these little things perfectly.
Yeah. Wow.
All the detail was right, really meticulous. His nickname for himself was Careful George.
Yeah. That's great. Oh my gosh. Can you talk about the tributaries as much as you're willing and able? I fished the North Fork. I mean, that's pretty well known. That is a amazing river. A buddy of mine caught a huge bull trout.
Some of the water in there that looks like it should hold fish doesn't, and some of it does. And there are guys now who just blow through that. They don't fish it at all when they put in. They just go right to the main stem. Okay, leaving fun for the rest of us, but you have to pick and choose on the North Fork.
Oh, you do?
The little tribs, the Landers Fork, used to be good, but it's gotten burned out. The Landers Fork is right up against the mountains just before you start going up toward the Continental Divide. And the Alice Creek fire burned in there a number of years ago, and it burned all the beautiful willows and things off of the Landers Fork so that it became hot.
Yeah.
And it's a roadway. I mean, it's used by trout that are moving, by cutthroat that are moving, but they're not holding in there at all. There's nothing there, which is a great loss.
Yeah.
And then there are others farther down, Montour Creek and so on. They're fishable, but you're choosing not to fish the Blackfoot and instead to fish lesser water when you do that.
Yeah. All these, I'm just playing around with my Trout Routes app here, which is a super cool app. You're talking about getting those maps from fly shops, and that's for sure. And then you can also just put Trout Routes in your pocket, which is super cool. And you can see the public and private areas, all the landings, the fly shops and everything. And all these trips are on there as well. One thing I also wanted to ask you about the Blackfoot was, your dad wrote about this in the book about how the Blackfoot River was formed, this glacier dam that broke loose, I don't know, tens of thousands of years ago. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, the last glacial advance began to retreat, and 10,000 years is a nice, easy figure. And it was all along just south of the 49th parallel. You had it in Wisconsin, you had it across the eastern part of Montana and the Dakotas and so on. And once you get to the western part of Montana, you're into the mountains. And there it was very different. When things started to melt, they would melt on the Great Plains on North Dakota and just kind of slop down all at once. It happened gradually, but what I mean is that it wasn't channeled. When you're getting the mountains, it's channeled. And you have ice blocks in the mountains that suddenly give way. And there's this huge lake behind them. The one that is relevant here is Glacial Lake Missoula. And when you're in Missoula, especially in the winter, when there's serrated snow on the hillsides, and you can see where the old edge of the lake was. And then 10 or 15 feet below that will be another layer where it was. And you see all these horizontal lines on Mount Jumbo and Mount Sentinel, which are around Missoula. So the glacial Lake Missoula backed up just about to Ovando in the Blackfoot Valley. And when you stand at Trixie's Saloon and restaurant in Ovando and look back at 200, you're on a little high point. And that, the geologists tell us, that's as far as it got. But it was also shallow there, whereas farther down there was more water and it was deeper, and when it began to recede, the action was much more violent. The glaciers had pushed down and pushed till up against the Garnet Mountains. And when all this melting happened, it was tipped so that a river was created up against the mountains, and it pushed the till out of the way. And there's still these big mounds of till that you can see as one bank of the river, and then the Granite Mountains on the other side, where the glaciers couldn't push it any farther, and the river is pushed right up against there. And the river is pretty much the way it was 10,000 years ago. Pretty much, It hasn't meandered the way, say, the Bitterroot does. The Bitterroot meanders year to year. If you like a hole in the Bitterroot this year, it may not be there next year. The whole thing may be shifted around because it's in the bottom of a valley.
Yeah.
And it's all pebbly, and it doesn't hold. The Blackfoot, for the most part, holds those holes in the upper reaches.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Once you get in the lowest reach, it's very narrow. That canyon is very narrow, and there isn't any room for it to swill around. It's where it was. So that's the geology of it. You can still see the places in the prairie around Ovando where the glacier left ice balls, and that'll be a pit. And then eventually the ice balls melt, and there's a pond Used to be great duck hunting. You go in there and jump hunt for
Okay.
ducks. And then the little mounds that were left. And Lewis remarks on that in his journal, the Prairie of the Mounds.
That's fascinating. Is that trail that they took? I've read the journals many times, and a lot of these trails were well-worn Indian trails. Can you still see that trail in some spots?
You can, and there are pieces of it that are still intact, and some are known and some are not well known.
Fascinating.
And
Yeah.
when I did Home Waters, one of the things I did was go back and try to recover as much as I could of the road to the Buffalo. The road to the Buffalo ran alongside the Blackfoot River, and it was essentially an interstate highway for centuries, if not millennia, for the Indians who lived west of the Continental Divide. It was their way of getting out onto the plains east of the Continental Divide to hunt buffalo. And they would usually do it twice a year. They'd do it once in the summer. And I found out by pushing my research pretty hard that they wouldn't do it again in the winter. Imagine doing that in the winter.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, they wore a trail. And originally it probably was people and dogs, and then with horses it became much more distinct. And it was the road to the Buffalo, the one that kind of parallels Route 200, was a gathering route. There are trails that come down from the north and a few from the south, where the Indians would use the little trails to get to the big trail, but they would all be on this main link, and they would go over the Continental Divide. That's been identified today as Lewis and Clark Pass, which is north of the Rogers Pass, about 8 miles. Clark never did it. Lewis went across that with a small party, about 9 guys, and the dog. And it may have been at the Lewis and Clark Pass.
Maybe.
Yeah, it isn't 100%. It's 95%. And you can hike up there. You go to the Alice Creek trailhead and take the hike. It's supposed to be 1.5 miles. It's the longest 1.5 miles I ever walked.
Is that right? Straight up, huh?
I'd put it at 1.75 miles and close to 2. And it isn't straight up. It is. It's not a killer hike. That is one reason that argues in its favor. If you go over Rogers Pass going from west to east, it isn't bad going up. But then when you get to the other side, going from the Continental Divide farther east, it is really, really rugged and long. And that's not so much the case with the Lewis and Clark Pass.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So that's that road. Anyway, Lewis was told that he had some Indians with him. Of course, when he left Clark and camped for the first night in July of 1806, before he started the trek through the Blackfoot Valley. And he assumed, incorrectly, that the Nez Perce would go along with him and act as guides. They said, no, we're not going with you because it's the Blackfoot Indian territory.
We're not messing with those guys.
And they are a rough outfit.
Yeah.
We don't want to have anything to do with that. But we will tell you this, you will not miss the trail.
Ah, really?
So that by that time, they had worn a well-worn trail. When I was doing the book, I was guided by a local historian who knows it and has worked on this for 25 years and has discovered places where there are sections of that trail that are still intact. And you can tell them because they're not wide enough for a truck or a car. They are much wider than a game trail.
Yeah.
And they are just right for a travois hauled behind a horse. And when they are on a slope, there will be a cut of 6, 8, 10 inches on the upslope side because it's been cut into the slope. And then it trails off on the other side.
That's
but you can see
fascinating.
it, and you can stand where Lewis and his crew and generations of Native Americans passed by. And that's a big thrill. Since the book came out, since Home Waters came out, people have continued the research into this and found other sections of the trail. And that, I think that's wonderful.
Yeah,
but,
I do too.
It keeps going. And there is now a retired Missoulian newspaper reporter, Kim Brigham, an old friend of mine, who does tours of the road to the Buffalo. And this is just great. It brings back that history.
Yeah.
A couple of things to remember about that. When Lewis and his party set foot on the road to the Buffalo in July of 1806, that marked the beginning of the end of a culture that had lasted on the plains and in the mountains for many, many centuries. It was on its way to over.
Yeah.
The white man had arrived. It was rich trapping country. Within a very few years, the trappers were all over that, fighting the Blackfoot, being killed by them and killing them in order to get the beaver. So that whole way of life was going to vanish as a consequence of Lewis's journey.
Yeah. Great stuff, John. I love it. You're a historian, obviously, and you're well read, and you know this stuff well. Well, that's it, folks. Part 1 with John Maclean. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Please come back in 2 weeks for part 2 of my interview with John, where we dive deeper into the book, the movie, and John's family. Be sure to check out our Instagram and Facebook pages to take a look at some of the one-of-a-kind photos John sent me. You can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. And if you like the show, please share with a buddy. As always, our music is by our Brothers Fountain. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.